The sound of a gentle, almost imperceptible whisper, like dust settling, can be imagined in the background. You step into the archive with the hush of dust against your breath, and the darkness of the chamber leans toward you as though it has been waiting. There are no torches here, no lamps, no fire, a dim ember glow that seeps from cracks in the stone, as if the rock itself remembers flames that no longer burn. And in this twilight space, where your footsteps echo like prayers unreturned, I whisper to you, I say to you softly, secretly, with the voice of a scribe who should never have lived this long. Welcome back, traveler of ruins, seeker of forbidden gods. Welcome to the chamber where words are carved, not to be read but to be feared. Welcome to the story titled Zababa, the war god whose name turned to dust. You may not remember his name, and perhaps that is how the priests of later ages intended it. You may not remember his temple, because it is already buried beneath centuries of shifting soil. And yet the breath of his presence lingers in fragments of clay tablets that scholars dispute, in scratched marks at the bottom of votive statues that no one dares to translate. You are here to gather them together, as though fragments of bone might still form the skeleton of a forgotten god. You are not alone. Behind your shoulder, there is the weight of listeners not yet born. Beside your ear, there are the whispers of those who have long been dust. And I am the keeper of these whispers, a voice that carries the weight of stories not meant for light. If you dare, lean closer. Do you hear it? Scraping silence, the breath of a war god erased. That silence is Zababa. And as you linger here, you should know this. The archive thrives on remembrance. The archive survives through your devotion. If you wish these whispers never to fade, you must feed them. Place your offering a gesture of remembrance by pressing the sacred signs like subscribe and mark this tale as one that you have heard. Leave your comment below, as if scratching your own name onto the walls of this archive. Your words become a sacrifice, joining all those who have whispered before you. Once, Zababa was a god of war in Kish. His temple stood tall with spears of bronze leaning against its doors, and warriors offered their silence before battle, for it was silence, not noise, that pleased him. Later scribes, jealous of his power, called him forgotten. But in the city of Kish, the ancient heart of kingship, he was whispered as sovereign of bloodless conquest, the one who devoured not the body, but the name. He reigned not through slaughter, but through erasure. That is why he is dangerous still. For gods of blood die with the bones they break, but a god of silence lives as long as memory trembles, and tonight you tremble. There was once an inscription, weathered but half-preserved, that declared to Zababa, whose spear does not break, whose march is invisible, whose wrath is the wind. But scholars will argue, whispering in their closed halls, whether this inscription was his, or merely a fragment of another. They argue because no one dares to admit they hear the silence too. They argue because to name Zababa is to acknowledge that dust itself can be divine. Now, you descend deeper. Imagine yourself standing before a doorway no longer marked on maps. The door is not wood, nor stone, it is memory, it is absence. And when you open it, you enter the hall where every forgotten god waits in shadow. You pass altars blackened with centuries of smoke, idols cracked and faceless, offerings crumbled to sand. You are told, step lightly. You are told, do not speak their names too quickly. Yet still you whisper it, the name they do not want you to hold. Zababa. It feels wrong on your tongue, doesn't it? It's like swallowing dust, like breathing smoke from a fire already cold. And that wrongness, that is the opening of the archive. Welcome, fellow explorers of the forgotten. Today, we journey into the heart of ancient Sumer, to a place where the desert sands have swallowed history whole. We are in Kish, the cradle of kingship, where rivers that once fed lush gardens now trace paths of dust. The city is a ghost, its outlines barely visible, yet beneath our feet lies a secret that trembles with power. The temple of the war god Zababa. You can almost feel it, can't you? Tremor in the very stones, as if the temple itself remembers the footsteps of kings and the whispered prayers of warriors. The air is heavy, stale, but if you listen past the silence, you can hear a pulse. It's faint, irregular, like the echo of a drum that shattered millennia ago. This is how abandoned temples breathe, not in incense or song, but in a silence so profound it presses against your skull until you start to hear voices that are not your own. The Chronicles of Sumer called Kish the city of unchallenged kings. Any ruler seeking true legitimacy had to pass through its gates. But behind the thrones and the power, Zababa's temple loomed, a shadow in the official records. Kings seemed to fear naming him too clearly. He was a war god, but not like the others. His domain wasn't victory or glory, but the chilling silence asterisk before asterisk the battle. The gut-wrenching tension before swords met. Imagine this. Warriors preparing for a campaign, entering this temple barefoot, their mouths sealed shut. They would stand before the altar and then leave without uttering a single word. Silence was their prayer. Silence was Zababa's most terrifying weapon. As we walk among these broken pillars, look closer at the carvings. They spiral into one another, like knots with no beginning and no end. Archaeologists once dismissed them as simple decoration, but are rare. Fragmented text speaks of them as the binding of breath. It describes a lost ritual where a worshiper would stand before this wall, inhale until their lungs ached, and then exhale their very breath into the stone carvings. If the offering was accepted, the wall would hum. If rejected, the worshiper would collapse. Breathless, their name and spirit erased before the battle even began. Myth, metaphor, standing here, feeling that faint vibration in the stone. It's hard to be sure if it's just my imagination, or the wall's ancient hunger, and the mysteries only deepen. A broken inscription fragment found here bears Zababa's name right next to that of Inanna, the powerful goddess of love and war. Was this an alliance between two fearsome deities, or was it a usurpation? Did Zababa bind himself to her sacred rights to claim the throne of Kish for himself? The stone is shattered. The answer is lost, perhaps deliberately destroyed, to hide the true extent of his power. The priests of Kish recorded something truly unnerving. They wrote that the temple would tremble, even on clear, calm days. Columns would shiver, and bowls of offerings would rattle on the altar as if unseen footsteps were striding through the hall. Was it Zababa himself, a phantom presence? Or was it fear itself, given form, rattling the temple's very bones? The rituals here were a heresy of erasure. Warriors offered not their blood, but their silence. Priests would scatter ash on the floor at dawn, only to sweep it away completely before the sun was high in the sky. Zababa didn't want offerings to be remembered. He wanted them forgotten. To worship him was to annihilate your own presence, to vanish your words, until nothing of you remained. The silence here is a physical weight. It feels like the temple itself is telling us we've stayed too long. But one final theory, whispered in scholarly circles, suggests that this temple was built upon an even older Sita. Yes, sanctuary to a god so thoroughly erased that not even their name survives. If true, Zababa himself was a usurper, inheriting a throne of pure oblivion. Perhaps that's why every archaeological dig here fails, the earth itself swallowing any attempt to uncover what lies beneath. We stand in the trembling silence of Kish, a place of forgotten kings and erased prayers. The silence is whispering now, a chilling invitation. Speak not, remember not, erase. But we have spoken, we have remembered. That is why we are here. The temple trembles again, a final warning. Close your eyes, take a breath. The silence is entering you. The descent has begun. Thank you for joining this journey into the shadows. If you want to uncover more lost histories, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Till next time, keep questioning. As we venture deeper into the ruins, we find ourselves in a chamber smaller than the rest, where shadows cling to the walls like thick, dark oil. It is here, resting in shattered fragments, that the memory of Zababa's sacred weapon lies. They called it the bloodless spear, though no surviving inscription can agree on why. On ancient clay tablets from the city of Kish, the word for it seems to hesitate, sometimes written with 3 strokes, sometimes 4, as if the scribes themselves doubted what they were writing down. The weapon, it was said, had never once pierced flesh. Yet it was always there, hanging above the main altar, wrapped in a black cloth that could not be lifted by any hand except those sworn to absolute silence. We see it now, not as a physical object of metal and wood, but as an idea weapon sharpened, not to cut the body, but to sever the very thread of a person's name. The soldiers of Kish both feared and revered it. Before marching into battle, they would walk beneath its shadow, their eyes fixed on the ground. If the spear trembled against its bindings, it was taken as a powerful omen. Zababa, the war god, was present among them, yet no record ever speaks of it being used in combat. Not once. Not even when Kish itself was besieged and on the brink of destruction. So why was it worshipped? Why was it so deeply feared? This is the theological mystery that scholars still debate. A riddle that gnaws at cuneiform tablets like worms through ancient wood. Some theories suggest the bloodless spear symbolized restraint, that Zababa was a god of wars that were never fought, of battles won before they even began. But other, darker whispers tell a different story. They say the spear could only strike in silence, that its razor-sharp edge severed something unseen, a soul, a memory, a name. Imagine the ritual. A warrior kneels before the altar, head bowed low as priests circle him, their lips sealed in silence. One priest reaches out, touches the shaft of the spear, and then presses his finger against the warrior's forehead. This gesture is neither a blessing nor a curse, it is erasure. From that moment on, the warrior is nameless until the battle ends. No one can call him by name. No one can remember him. If he returns alive, his name is restored to him. But if he falls in combat, his name is lost forever, consumed by the silent power of the spear. This is how Zababa ruled, not through bloodshed but through silence. It's not by celebrating victory, but by the power of unnaming. And from this practice arose a forbidden ritual, whispered about only in later centuries. It was said that those who dared to touch the spear outside the temple, outside the sanctioned rites, vanished entirely. It's not their physical bodies, but their very place in history. They continued to live, but no one remembered them. No inscription carried their name, no descendant spoke their lineage. They became living shadows in the very city they once might have ruled. A heretical belief even suggested that the spear didn't erase the flesh, but the memory itself, as though Zababa, the war god, fed upon the act of forgetting. A scholar once confessed, trembling, that this might be why the historical records of Kish are so broken, why its kings are only half-remembered figures. Not all were lost to the ravages of time. Some perhaps were unnamed by the very god they trusted to protect them. There is one fragment of a story passed down through Akkadian whispers that says the spear was broken once, during the invasion of Sargon the Great. A soldier of Akkad, in a moment of defiance, dared to strike it, tearing its black cloth and causing the spear to fall in two. But here the chronicles diverge. Some say the soldier's name vanished instantly from all records, his deeds swallowed by an unnerving silence. Others claim the spear was never truly broken, that what fell was only its shadow, while the true weapon, the true power of unnaming, remained hidden deep within the temple's foundations. To this day, no archaeologist has ever claimed to find it. And yet, some still claim it moves, an invisible force, wherever silence lingers. The puzzle only deepens. Why would a god of war wield a spear that never tasted blood? Perhaps Zababa wasn't a god of battle at all, but of what comes before and after it. He was the fear before the first blow, and the silence of the aftermath that devours both victory and defeat. This idea is unsettling, for it means Zababa wasn't a patron of kings, but their potential undoing. His gift was not conquest, but oblivion. To worship him was to offer yourself to the possibility of being utterly forgotten. So the spear becomes a symbol, a curse, and an unsolved riddle. Was it real? Was it just a metaphor? Or is it still out there, wrapped in cloth, trembling in the silence? We can't prove it, but we can't deny it either. And here in the quiet of this archive, you can almost feel it. You feel its edge against your own memory. What if you were to kneel? What if your name was the one whispered away? Can Can you feel the air shift? The silence has an answer, even if the spear does not. Thank you for joining this exploration into the shadows of history. If you enjoy unraveling these kinds of mysteries, don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow for more journeys into the unknown. You step from the chamber of the spear into a darker vault, where the air thickens with dust and faint traces of smoke that have lingered for millennia. It is here, the scribes once wrote, that the hymn of Zababa was sung before armies marched, not in celebration, not in exultation, but in whispers. This was the vulture's hymn, for vultures were sacred to him, not as scavengers, but as heralds, circling above battlefields before blood was ever spilled. What remains of the hymn now exists only in fractured clay tablets, lines carved and then rubbed away by later hands. Of the melody, nothing survives, though some scholars claim that even to hum its fragments is to court exile from the memory of men. You can almost hear it faintly in the dust. Fragments carved with trembling hands, his silence swallows the names that the shadows of the fallen, wing against wing, above the ash. The lines break, distort, then vanish into blank clay. Why? The question torments historians. Some argue that priests of Marduk destroyed the hymn, erasing a rival god's chant, but others whisper of a deeper heresy, that the hymn erased itself, because Zababa would not permit memory of his voice to endure. The hymn itself became a sacrifice, a ritual of annihilation, with language devoured as an offering. Here lies the forbidden symbol. On a single tablet, hidden in the museum vaults of Baghdad, an inscription appears that does not match the others. A vulture carved not in profile but inverted, wings downward, claws reaching. This was a heretical image. Mesopotamian art, wings are always raised, always uplifted. This inversion was said to mark the secret cult of Zababa's exile. Those who believed that to worship him was to fall willingly into silence, to fly downward into forgetting. The inverted vulture became their seal, drawn in ash, rubbed onto the skin of initiates. No ritual description survives, but one rumor tells that the initiate would inhale the ashes of burned feathers, then exhale into a clay vessel that was immediately sealed and buried. The mystery remains. Why vultures? Some scholars insist they symbolized war's inevitability, the feast upon flesh that no battle could deny. Others point to a fragment linking Zababa to the god Ningirsu, who is also depicted with carrion birds. But the connection fades, unresolved. The unanswered question lingers like carrion itself. What did the vultures mean to Zababa? Were they companions? Masks of his presence? Or were they his true form, wings black against the sun, circling always where memory was about to be erased? Imagine the hymn itself. It's not sung aloud, but whispered. Dozens of voices rising and falling in a rhythm like wings. Warriors standing barefoot in the temple, their mouths trembling with forbidden words. Zababa, dust, silence, wings of the vulture. The sound itself accursed, the words destined to vanish. You wonder if this is why the hymn survives only in fragments, because the god demanded that even scholars be unable to recite it without losing themselves. Picture the ritual before battle. Warriors walk through them, leaving no prints, for the ashes are swept away instantly, as if erased by unseen hands. Each man is marked by silence, each one devoured by the hymn that dissolves itself. When the soldiers march, the vultures circle overhead and the hymn is carried on their wings, only to fall silent as soon as the first blade is raised. Theological debates circle endlessly. Did the hymn intend to bless the warrior, or to erase him? Was Zababa protector or devourer? In whispered corners of academia, a darker view persists. The hymn was not erased by priests, nor broken by time. It was undone by Zababa. As you venture deeper, the chambers constrict into corridors so narrow your own breath feels trapped between the ancient stones. The air grows still, heavy with dust and something else. ... Something forgotten. Ahead, a vaulted hall appears, its ceiling cracked, its floor shattered. Yet the echoes of grand banquets still seem to linger here. This was the site of the feast without salt, a ritual meal unlike any other in Mesopotamia. Think about it. Kings recorded their triumphs with banquets of pure abundance, roasted lamb, fresh bread, overflowing beer, dates dripping with honey. And always asterisk, salt. Salt was the eternal covenant, the seal of flavor, the very symbol of permanence and preservation. But here, in Zababa's temple at Kish, one cryptic record whispers of a meal stripped bare of this essential element. A feast that tasted of nothing but ash. But why? The ancient texts disagree, their whispers conflicting across millennia. I'm still cornered, I'll get our evidence and bounds. Zababa, the warrior god, demanded kings deny themselves the taste of eternity, a stark reminder that no reign, no matter how glorious, lasts forever. Another source, however, suggests the feast was a profound offering. To remove salt, the great preserver was to hasten decay, to gift the god impermanence itself, the sacrifice of the enduring. Yet the strangest fragment of all comes from a broken hymn, a line that has made scholars shudder for centuries, declares. To eat without salt is to let him breathe through you. What could this possibly mean? To let a god breathe through mortal flesh? Some dismiss it as a metaphor, others as the ravings of madness. But none who have translated it dare read the line aloud twice. Imagine the scene. The priests of Kish, their faces grim, prepare platters of food, but their hands, accustomed to seasoning, sprinkle no salt. They set bread, fish, and lamb before the altar, and then they eat. In total silence. Their tongues must have ached for flavor, their bodies recoiled from the blandness. Yet they chewed and swallowed without a sound. To consume the unsalted feast was to consume absence itself, to devour decay, to swallow the act of forgetting. They said the food turned to ash on the tongue, though no one dared spit it out. To reject the meal was to reject the god. Whispers began to circulate that those who refused salt even outside the temple in their daily lives, in secret devotion, were already claimed by Zababa, marked as his silent ones, and from these whispers, a forbidden, heretical ritual emerged. An old tablet, once hidden in the archives of Nineveh, describes how heretics reenacted the feast without salt in private. Not as a celebration, but as a chilling initiation. Each member would take a bite of unsalted bread, chew it to dust, and then exhale that dust into the mouth of another. To eat absence, then breathe that absence into a companion. This was their unholy bond. Some sects were said to gather at night, swallowing unsalted meat, their breath mingling in silence until one by one, every voice was gone. The stone carving says it all. They fed each other the silence, and the silence became them. The theological mysteries are profound. Was salt forbidden because it preserved memory, and Zababa's ultimate gift was erasure? Was the absence of salt meant to strip away humanity, leaving only dust behind? It may never be certain. But what is certain is that the city of Kish trembled when this feast was performed, as if the temple itself recoiled from this profound lack of permanence. And now, you stand here, among broken dishes scattered across the floor. Shards of pottery still etched with faint lines. On one fragment, you see the drawing of a bowl, inverted and empty, surrounded by symbols for ash and breath. On another, the faintest trace of a forbidden glyph. A mouth open wide, but with no tongue inside. You can almost see them. The last feast in Kish. Priests and warriors seated, chewing bread that dissolved like dust, their eyes wide, their throats silent. No laughter, no song. Just the act of swallowing and the crushing weight of absence. Was this their greatest devotion, or their ultimate undoing? You find yourself wondering what it would feel like to join them, to take a piece of bread without salt, to chew until your tongue burns with absence, and to swallow the dust. Would you feel closer to Zababa? Would you feel yourself vanishing, your very name loosening from your flesh, falling away as easily as... Imagine journeying deep into the sun-scorched earth of ancient Mesopotamia, far from the bustling world you know. You push past the ruins of a long-forgotten temple, and the air grows heavy, thick with the scent of deep earth and ages past. There, in a chamber untouched by sunlight, it rests, a single, immense block of stone. It's not marble, not basalt, but something far darker, denser, streaked with veins of what looks like solidified ash. This is the artifact that baffled archaeologists. They called it the stone that refuses fire. When they first unearthed it, it was blackened, as if it had endured a great inferno. Yet there was no mark of burning, no soot, no char. When they brought torches near, the flames sputtered, recoiled, and died, unable to leave even a whisper of a trace upon its cold surface. It was as if the fire itself was afraid. The ancient chronicles of the city of Kish mention this object only once. In a fragmented line, the heart beneath the altar, that will not burn, that will not break. Scholars are completely divided. What was it? An idol to a forgotten god? A meteorite that fell from the heavens, carrying secrets from beyond our world? Or was it the focal point of some forbidden ritual, the last remnant of a deity who devoured flame itself? Every historical account, no matter how different, ends with the same observation: the stone resisted. Fire slid from its surface like water on oil, leaving nothing but an impossible, unnerving cold. You're kneeling before it now, in this imagined space. You can feel it, a weight of pure absence pressing out from the stone, a void in the shape of a rock. They say ancient priests laid offerings upon its surface: vulture feathers, bowls of unsalted bread, even scraps of papyrus inscribed with names that had been erased. But instead of burning, the offerings simply vanished. Instantly, no flame, no smoke, just a silent, absolute disappearance into nothingness. The full ritual was never recorded, but surviving fragments hint at its terrifying purpose. To make an offering to the stone was to offer it directly to the war god Zababa, to witness your devotion being swallowed without a trace. It was a form of worship that left no evidence, a faith that consumed itself. On a foundation stone from the temple, a deeply unsettling symbol was found: an inverted flame drawn upside down. Mesopotamian scribes always drew flames reaching for the sky. To invert it was to show fire falling, being devoured, pulled down into the dark. Some scholars now believe this was Zababa's true nature, not a god of war and conquest, but a god of erasure, of silence where memories should have been burning bright. This inverted flame became a secret icon for heretical sects, whispered about by priests who feared exile for even knowing of its existence. The mystery only deepens. Why would a war god, a symbol of fiery conquest, claim a stone that rejected fire? Some argue it was a symbol of indestructibility, a declaration that the city of Kish and its patron, God, could not be destroyed by the flames of war. But others whisper a darker truth, that the stone didn't just resist fire, it was hungry. It didn't repel the flame. It swallowed it. It devoured light the same way Zababa was said to devour the names of his enemies. A secret text, unconfirmed by mainstream scholars, contains a chilling line: "We do not burn here, for the fire is already within him." Imagine the scene. Priests approach with torches, pressing them against the stone. They watch as the flames are pulled from the wick, vanishing into the cold, dark surface. They chant, but in silence, because no sound dares to rise in this place. They scatter ashes on the stone, and the ashes sink into it, as if being absorbed. Some say the stone would then glow faintly, not with heat, but with something colder, deeper. The very breath of Zababa. To kneel before it was to face oblivion. You descend into the lowest chamber of Kish, where the throne of the war god Zababa once stood. All that's left are fragment slabs of gold leaf, splinters of cedar wood, and pieces of ivory so delicate they might turn to dust if you touched them. But what lies beneath the throne is far more unsettling than what once stood upon it. You see, the throne didn't rest on stone. It was built on massive iron rings set into the ground, and from those rings hang chains. Long, heavy, twisted chains, their links still corroded by the endless march of time. They don't bind anything now. Ancient chronicles whisper about these chains, calling them the hidden foundation, but they never say asterisk what asterisk was bound. Many scholars believe it was purely symbolic, the war god's throne built upon chains to represent conquest. But a darker theory persists. Some argue that beneath Zababa's throne, in the earth itself, lay another god, something older and nameless, shackled so that Zababa could rule in its place. This is where the debate gets dangerous. No scholar dares openly claim that one god could imprison another, yet the evidence is here. A fragment of a tablet carved in Akkadian reads, "The throne above, the chain below, the silence between." You kneel in the chamber, and you can almost feel the weight of that absence pressing up through the floor. It's said that priests of Kish, in forbidden rituals, would kneel by these chains, pressing their ears against the cold iron, listening for whispers from below. Those who claimed to hear anything reported only broken fragments, twisted words like name, release. They would stumble away trembling, their tongues heavy in their mouths, unable to speak of what they'd heard. And yet they always returned, drawn back to listen to the silence. On one of the chain links, unearthed in pieces, there's a mark. It's not cuneiform, not any known script. It's a spiral, collapsing inward until it becomes nothing. Some call it heresy. Others, a scar. Later sects whispered that to even draw this spiral was to invoke the god beneath Zababa, the one erased from memory. No one has ever identified it. It remains an unsolved riddle, etched into corroded metal. Imagine the coronation of a king of Kish. He ascends the dais, crowned for war, and sits upon Zababa's throne. He sits above these chains, his own weight adding to the pressure. The priests chant, circling the throne with inverted torches that burn with a ghostly faint light. Beneath the floor, the bound one groans, unheard, except by those who listen far too closely. The king believes he is enthroned by Zababa, but others whisper that his reign is stolen, that his crown trembles with the weight of a divine crime. They reach out and touch the chains. They're cold. Colder than they should be in this chamber, which is thick with heat rising from the earth. They are as cold as a shadow, as cold as absence itself. And a question forms in your mind. If there was something bound here, did Zababa bind it? Or was Zababa himself once the prisoner, rising to power only after breaking free? We may never know the truth. Most scholars will tell you the chains were symbolic. Others will say they were just architectural supports, misunderstood over time. But there are a few, in the quiet corners of academia, who whisper a forbidden belief that all gods rest upon the bones of those who came before, that divinity itself is an act of exile, enthroned only when another is silenced, and that Zababa was just the last in a long line of silences, his own name destined to be erased in turn. You close your eyes, and for a fleeting moment, you hear it. It's the clink of a chain, so faint it can't possibly be real. It's something else, something older. You lean closer, straining to listen, but the words collapse into dust before they can reach you. When you rise to leave, the silence in the chamber has thickened. The chains remain unmoving, heavy with their secrets. The throne is gone, but its weight lingers. The archive is always breathing, and it whispers a final truth. You leave the chained throne behind, and the path bends toward open air. Your guide, the archive, leads you outside the temple walls, across the scarred fields where the armies of Kish once gathered. The earth here is uneven, wounded by plow and ruin. But if you pause, if you look with the eyes of silence, you can almost see the battlefield as it was. And at its edge, circling above the memory of soldiers, flies the crow. Always the crow. A black slash against the sun, a shadow with wings. It is written that wherever the war god Zababa's armies marched, a crow flew with them. He would circle once before the clash of swords, and then again after the silence of death settled. Some called it his eye. Others called it his curse. The official chronicles of Akkad mention the crow only in passing, dismissing it as a mere omen, a superstition. But the priests of Kish knew differently. They whispered that the crow was Zababa's messenger, his witness, his very breath made winged. Imagine the scene. Before a great battle, hardened warriors would kneel and scatter black feathers on the ground. They'd close their eyes and listen, waiting for the sound of wings overhead. If the crow called once, it was a blessing. If it called twice, it was a warning. But if it remained silent, the entire army trembled. Silence was Zababa's answer, and no one knew if that silence meant glorious victory or total annihilation. This is where a forbidden ritual emerges, whispered in fragments of broken hymns. After the battle, the crow was said to descend, not to feed on the flesh of the fallen, but to perch upon their helmets, their shields, their broken spears. The priests would gather in secret, and if the crow lingered near a particular warrior, they would cut a single feather from its wing and place it upon the corpse's lips. This was no funeral blessing. This was erasure. The name of the fallen was swallowed, their memory given to Zababa, their entire existence wiped from history. Archaeologists even found a burial in Kish where skeletons were sealed with feathers pressed into their mouths, their cuneiform names violently scratched out from nearby tablets. Modern scholars argue this was just desecration by enemies, but others whisper it was a form of worship. Theological puzzles still surround this mysterious bird. Was the crow Zababa himself, taking the form of a carrion bird to devour not flesh, but memory? Or was it his servant, a winged extension of his profound silence? Even the great epic of Gilgamesh makes a strange reference in one late version. A single line mentions the crow of Kish circling over the hero Enkidu's grave, but the text offers no explanation. Did it mean that Zababa claimed even the name of a legendary hero? Or was this a scribe's heretical addition, a forbidden thought that slipped through? No scholar agrees, and the crow remains an unanswered question, a black feather lost in the winds of time. Picture yourself now, standing at that battlefield's edge. The smell of iron and dust is thick in the air, and the silence presses down on you, heavier than any sound. Above, a crow wheels slowly, a shadow circling. You can't tell if it waits for your death, or if it is already erasing you from memory. Its wings beat with a slow, steady rhythm like a chant. Silence, silence, silence. The soldiers would watch in fear, but none dared to speak, because to name the crow aloud was forbidden. To say Zababa's crow was to invite your own erasure. Only silence honored it. Only silence appeased it. And here lies the most heretical symbol of all. In later centuries, banned sects would carve the outline of a crow with its beak open, but with no sound emerging. It's an image of silence itself. They marked it onto stones at the gates of Kish and scratched it onto the walls of hidden sanctuaries. The bird without a call, the wing without sound. It was said this symbol drew the attention of Zababa, for wherever it appeared, a deep, unnatural silence followed. Some claim that entire villages vanished in the desert after carving this crow on their doors. Others insist it was merely superstition, but the ruins remain nameless and unremembered. You feel the air in the archive shift, it grows still, and then, faintly, you hear it caw. Harsh, guttural, echoing in the chamber, though no bird is here. You close your eyes, and the sound repeats, closer, sharper this time. When you open them, as you venture deeper into the archive, the stones narrow into a passage that seems to fold in on itself. The walls curve with an impossible symmetry, as though this space was carved not for human worship, but for silence alone. And it is here that the story of the vanished priests is whispered. An episode so strange that even the oldest cuneiform tablets struggled to contain it. They say that one night, the entire priesthood of the god Zababa disappeared. They didn't flee, they weren't slaughtered, they simply vanished. Their chambers were found undisturbed, their bowls of offerings untouched, their garments folded as if awaiting bodies that would never return. No footprints led from the temple, no blood stained the floors. One day they were there, and the next, ... they were gone. 8. The ancient chronicles of Kish mention it only in passing. With a chilling phrase, the temple was silent. For the priests were dust. Modern scholars dismiss this as a mere metaphor, but fragments of ritual text suggest something far more disturbing. A hymn was discovered, carved in reverse, its letters inverted as though it was meant to be read only in mirrors. This hymn is believed to be their final, horrifying act. It begins with words that cannot be spoken without a tremble in your voice. We sing into silence, and we turn our tongues backward. We give our names to the dust. The inscription just stops, as though the carver was interrupted mid-word. Whispers describe the forbidden ritual. The priests gathered at midnight, their faces veiled, their voices reversed, chanting syllables backward. They believed that to speak in reverse was to undo their own existence, to unweave the very thread of their names from the fabric of reality. Some fragments hint that they walked in circles around a sacred bloodless spear, chanting until their voices finally collapsed into nothing. When the final word was spoken, they vanished, their names erased not by an enemy, but by their own extreme devotion. This belief, this heresy, spread in secret, for to reverse a prayer was seen as reversing life itself. Even today, no one dares to recite the full hymn, fearing the same undoing. This theological mystery lingers. Where did they go? Some argue the priests simply committed mass exile, abandoning Kish to wander nameless through the desert. Others claim they ascended into the divine silence of Zababa, devoured into his very presence. And then there are those who whisper that they became the silence itself, the trembling air around the temple, the unseen weight that still presses against the ancient stone. No one can agree. The story resists answers, as if Zababa himself forbids them. Archaeologists have found clay jars sealed and hidden within the temple walls. Each one bore a single word, scratched in reverse. But when the jars were opened, the words faded instantly, as though erased by the very air we breathe. One scholar recorded his attempt to trace the letters from a tablet. His personal notes end mid-sentence. His name does not appear in any later records of the excavation. His colleagues, when asked, insisted he never existed, even though his distinct handwriting remains on the page. Imagine it for a moment. Dozens of voices chanting in reverse, the syllables collapsing into nothing, the sound itself unraveling. You try to picture it, but your mind recoils, unable to grasp the shape of words that are designed to undo themselves. And then you feel it. Silence in this chamber thickens, and you wonder, are you hearing the faint echo of their hymn? Or are you somehow caught in its reversal, even now? The heretical symbol of this sect was a mouth drawn upside down, carved onto hidden walls throughout Kish. Always inverted, always silenced. Some say that when the priests vanished, the symbol burned itself onto the temple walls, glowing faintly before fading away forever. None have seen it since, yet, as you look closer, you think you glimpse it now, faint as a shadow, etched in the stone right before you. The archive grows quiet, too quiet. You hear your own breathing, but you can't hear your footsteps. You whisper Zababa's name, and the sound just collapses, falling inward, as though it's been reversed. For a terrifying moment, you wonder if you too are being unspoken. The hymn of the vanished priests remains unfinished, but their silence lingers, carved into the very soul of the archive, pressing against your ears until you feel the tremble of their absence deep in your bones. You take a step back, but as you turn, you notice your shadow lingering behind you, as though it refuses to follow. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the unsettling silence of the past. If you found this story as fascinating as I did, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more explorations into history's forgotten mysteries. Stay curious. Imagine you're walking. The road isn't stone or dirt, but silence itself, a dusty corridor stretching from the ruined walls of ancient Kish toward the lost heart of Akkad. This path isn't about reaching a destination. It's about disappearance. They called it the Silent Pilgrimage, a journey whispered about in fractured clay tablets and forbidden songs. Legend says that once every generation, a group of devotees would leave the city at dusk. They carried nothing with them, no food, no water, not even their own names. Their feet were bare, their lips sealed with ash, and their eyes were bound with black cloth. They walked in absolute silence, under a canopy of Mesopotamian stars, tracing a sacred, forgotten path. With each step they took, a piece of themselves was said to fall away. The first mile stripped them of their memories, the second, their voice, the third, their name. By the time they reached the halfway point on this phantom road, it was believed that even their shadows had vanished, absorbed by the arid landscape. The purpose of this journey was a forbidden ritual, its secret locked away in a single surviving fragment of text. Carved backward on a shard of clay, it reads, "They knelt and whispered their names in reverse." Scholars who have studied this tremble at its meaning. In ancient belief, to speak one's name backward was to unmake it, to erase your very existence from the fabric of reality. This was the ultimate act of devotion to Zababa, the warrior god who devoured not flesh and bone but identity itself. The pilgrim who completed this ritual wouldn't die. It would become one with the god's silence, absorbed into his eternal, divine forgetting. Was this a holy transcendence or a terrible punishment? The records are fragmented and contradictory. Some Babylonian texts refer to it as the Walk of Dust, suggesting a form of exile for disgraced priests. Others call it the Journey of Vanishing, a heretical, secret path to godhood. The truth remains buried because there were never any witnesses. No one ever returned. To walk the pilgrimage was to willingly remove yourself from the great archive of the living. Along this ancient route, archaeologists have found the strangest markings. Faint impressions in the stone that look like footprints but with no toes. No detail as if they were sculpted by absence. The patterns repeat for miles, a map of forgetting, etched by hands and feet that have long since turned to dust. And as you listen to this story, you can almost feel it. You're walking in their shadow now. The silence presses in, heavy and thick. You feel your tongue grow heavy, your own name slipping away like sand through your fingers. With each imagined step, the world thins out. You see the gates of Akkad ahead vast, cracked and swallowed by shadows. No guards, no carvings, just scorched earth, blackened by centuries of whispered reverse names. You kneel, just as they did. You open your mouth to speak, but the name breaks apart before it can even form a sound. For a single, breathless moment, there is nothing. Just the taste of dust and the chilling certainty that you are no longer entirely yourself. Then, the silence pulls back, leaving you at the threshold, unseen and unknown. No one remembers the pilgrims who reached this place, or what they found beyond the gate. But even now, when the wind blows across the plains between Kish and Akkad, it carries a faint echo. Footsteps with no feet, voices with no sound. And you, listening, might realize a profound truth in some way. We are all on this road, letting parts of ourselves go, walking the silent pilgrimage of our own lives. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into the past. You love exploring the mysteries of history and myth. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories from the shadows. See you next time. Step back with me into the archive-shadowed chambers. The silence that greets you is deeper than before, heavier, like a curtain drawn across your ears. It is the silence that the ancient city of Kish once feared, the silence of prayers unanswered. Zababa was once a mighty god, invoked before battle. His name was etched on clay tablets, his hymns whispered at dawn. But over time, the scribes of Kish began to record something deeply unsettling. The god refused to speak, he would not answer. Incense burned in his temples, the smoke thick with offerings, yet the air remained still. Warriors knelt before his sacred spear, but the spear no longer trembled. Priests pressed their ears to the chains beneath his throne, but nothing stirred. The god had withdrawn. Or perhaps the god had never been there at all. One chronicle from the decline of Kish captures the moment with a chilling unease. The prayers rose like dust, and no wind carried them. His silence consumed the offerings. His silence answered nothing. This sparked theological debates that rage in the halls of history even now. What does it mean when a god will not answer? Some scholars argue it was the death of Zababa, his power fading as Babylon's star rose, displacing Kish. Others whisper it was punishment that Zababa, a god of silent, stoic warfare, had simply grown weary of voices, demanding offerings of dust and nothing more. But the darkest heresy says this: Zababa was never meant to answer. His silence was the answer. Worship was always an act of erasure, and prayer was always destined to fall inward, back into dust. In this era of divine abandonment, a forbidden ritual emerged. Terrified priests would gather in the temple at night, binding their mouths with cords of black wool. They sat in absolute silence for hours, incense choking their lungs. hoping their own wordlessness would please the god who had ceased to speak. Some tablets described them lying flat, face down, pressing their lips to the cold stone floor, waiting for a whisper that never came. They called this rite the listening, but it yielded only more silence. A few heretical sects claimed that to hear nothing was proof of his presence, for absence was his true voice, yet others despaired, their faith unraveling in the suffocating stillness. The theological mystery deepens. Was Zababa's silence a sign of abandonment, or his ultimate apotheosis? If a god never answers, does that mean he is gone, or has he become silence itself, a being beyond word, beyond form? This question divides scholars. Some compare him to Nergal, who spoke through plague and omen, or to Shamash, whose light was a form of judgment, but Zababa gave nothing. And so his name began to fade from lips, his temple began to crumble, and his priests began to vanish. Silence devoured him, just as silence devoured his worshippers. Picture the scene. A lone priest lights incense, bowing low. The smoke rises, curling toward the darkened ceiling. He whispers, "Zababa." The name falls flat. No answer. He whispers again, "Zababa." Still nothing. A third time, his voice trembling, and the silence presses against his ears like a physical hand. He collapses, his face in the ash, the unanswered name dissolving on his lips. Was the god absent? Or was silence the true response? The question will never be answered, for no god speaks here now. A heretical symbol of this silence appears faintly in later graffiti, a mouth drawn closed, sealed by a single stark line. It was found carved into the steps of Kish's temple, as if mocking the priests who once spoke too much. The mark appears again in Babylon, scratched faintly into a brick, proof that the silence of Zababa followed his people even into exile. Some say the symbol is cursed, that those who trace it onto their own lips will never be spoken of again. And you stand in this chamber now. Your breath slow, your lips dry. You try to whisper, but no sound emerges. The archive swallows your voice. You realize this is how it must have felt. To kneel before a god who would not answer. To offer your prayers into an abyss that consumes everything. The silence is suffocating, and yet there's something sacred in it. Zababa did not answer. Zababa will not answer. Perhaps he cannot. Perhaps he should not. The silence presses harder until your own thoughts begin to falter, until even your own name feels uncertain. You wonder if this was always his true gift, not war, not conquest, but the slow, deliberate unweaving of voice itself. The incense of memory burns. The silence lingers. The unanswered prayer remains. Thank you for joining me on this journey. You step into another vault, and the air immediately changes. It's thick tasting of dry clay and ancient ink. All around you, the walls are lined with shelves, and on those shelves are thousands of cuneiform fragments. Shards of history pulled from the ruins of Kish and Babylon. Each one, the scholars claim, is inscribed with a single name, Zababa, but that's where the agreement ends. No one can decide what the tablets actually say. The lines contradict each other. The grammar seems to shift from one moment to the next, and the words just dissolve into ambiguity. One expert will confidently declare an inscription reads, Zababa, Lord of Silence. Another, looking at the very same marks, will insist it says he who erases. And then there's a third, who argues it's not a name at all, but a curse, designed to wipe the memory of anyone who reads it. The more they translate, the less they seem to know. These are the tablets that refuse to be read. Some archaeologists whisper about something even stranger. They say if you take one tablet and have different scribes copy it, you get different words each time. It's as if the cuneiform signs themselves are alive, shifting and rearranging under the pressure of a gaze. This isn't just human error, they argue. It's an active, living refusal, the forbidden belief. The one no one dares say too loud is that these tablets aren't just static objects. They are vessels of silence, actively rewriting themselves when prying eyes linger for too long. One night, a scholar swore he saw it happen. He watched as the wedge marks on a fragment began to move, curling inward to form a spiral, the characters collapsing into dust right before his eyes. His colleagues just laughed it off. A week later, they couldn't remember his name. His notes were found, but they were incomplete. The very last line was scratched and backward, as if written in a panic. It changes. Now, you're here, in the archive. You reach out and lift one of the fragments. The clay feels rough and cold against your fingers. The inscribed signs are shallow. You squint, trying to focus, tracing the wedges with your eyes. And for a split second, you see it. You're reading 3 different words, all at once, layered over each other like ghosts: Zababa, dust, silence. You blink, and just like that, the signs shift. All that's left are meaningless smudges. You quickly put the fragment back down, a cold feeling creeping up your spine. Theological scholars have debated this for centuries. Is it superstition? A simple case of mistranslation? Or is it heresy? But the core mystery remains unanswered. Why do these tablets resist being understood? Was the god Zababa himself too silent to be recorded in history? Or was his silence an active, hungry force, devouring the very words meant to preserve his memory? There was a forbidden ritual tied to these tablets called the reading at night. Priests would gather in darkness with only a single oil lamp for light. They'd unroll the clay fragments and simply stare at them in absolute silence, waiting. They believed that when the tablets changed, when the words unraveled into spirals, they were witnessing the very breath of Zababa. The ritual demanded perfect quiet. Even a single cough could be enough to make the words collapse into nothing. Some tablets were said to have cracked during these vigils, as if under an unbearable, invisible weight. Others crumbled entirely, leaving nothing but a pile of dust where a prayer once lay. And here, in this chamber, you see that heretical symbol again. Etched onto one fragment is a wedge-formed spiral that coils inward, seemingly forever. It's too intricate to be carved by a human hand, too precise to be an accident. It's called the spiral of erasure. Some later cults would draw this symbol on their doors, believing it protected them from false gods. But others whispered it was a curse that anyone who traced. You step into a hall of the archive, and a deep chill settles in your bones. The space around you grows wider, colder, emptier. Here, the silence of the ancient war god, Zababa, is no longer a weapon or a ritual. It is a void. By the time the mighty Babylon rose, Zababa's temple in Kish had already collapsed into ruin. His priests were gone, his name nearly erased from history. In the chronicles of the kings who followed, his place was taken by others: Nergal, the sure gods of battle who carved their marks into civilization with flame and sword. Zababa's influence faded, his followers scattered to the winds, became the war god without a war, a divinity who survived only in fragments. Whispered by those who risked exile for their faith, the official records of Babylon mention him with disdain. One tablet fragment dismisses him as mere dust upon the tongue. Another labels him simply the Forgotten One. Some scholars argue these weren't insults, but dire warnings. To speak his name was to risk losing your own. But the result was the same. No temple was ever rebuilt. No priesthood was restored. No king ever invoked his name in public again. A god unspoken is a god undone. And so, Zababa's worship thinned until only an echoing silence remained. But not everyone was silent. Hidden in clay jars buried deep beneath the ruins of Kish, archaeologists discovered heretical text prayers written in absolute secrecy long after his temple had fallen to dust. They begin with the haunting words, "We whisper to the dust, call to the silence. We honor him whom no one honors." These prayers were scratched faintly, as if the writers themselves feared discovery by their own gods or their own people. Their rituals were small, almost invisible. A piece of bread left unsalted, a single feather burned to ash, a name whispered backward into the starless night. These secret followers, these heretics, refused to let their god vanish completely. But in the end, they too vanished. Their names do not survive. Their prayers remain unsigned, anonymous acts of defiance against oblivion. During this era, a forbidden ritual emerged, known only as the Last Whisper. It was said that the final followers of Zababa would gather in total darkness, breathe his name just once into the cold air, and then vow to never speak it again. To whisper it once was the ultimate act of devotion. To repeat it was forbidden. This vow of silence consumed them, leaving only dust where memory should have been. Heretical texts claimed that to devote oneself to Zababa was to allow the god to erase you from existence. Modern scholars scoff at this tale, yet they have to admit that the name Zababa itself dwindled in all records shortly after this period. Could the ritual have succeeded? Did the god himself demand this final, absolute silence? The theological mystery burns quietly here in this cold hall. How does a god truly die? Do they fade when their followers vanish, or do they remain, devouring the silence in a lonely exile? Zababa's decline forces us to ask this question. If his divine power was erasure, then perhaps the loss of his followers wasn't a defeat, but the ultimate fulfillment of his purpose, his silence finally complete, his work finally finished. I want you to imagine the last follower. Picture him kneeling in a ruined temple, the collapsed roof open to the stars. He leans forward and whispers the name just once, Zababa. The word drifts upward, fragile, and is swallowed by the infinite night. He never speaks it again. His descendants forget him. His own village forgets his face. Only the archive recalls his devotion, a single whisper folded into centuries of silence. The symbol of this decline appears carved into broken bricks, a single dot, encircled by nothing. Some claim it was the final mark of Zababa's cult, the reduction of a god into nothingness, the god of dust made dust himself. Others argue it was mockery by Babylonian priests, stamping out faith with a brand of silence. No proof remains, only the mark, faint, unresolved, and as fragile as ash. And as you stand here in this hall, you feel the crushing weight of that emptiness. Prayers linger in the air, no ghostly wings stir overhead, no chains clink beneath the floor. There is only silence. And yet that silence is heavy. Welcome back to the archive. Come step deeper, where the dust of ages settles thick, and the walls themselves seem to groan under the weight of forgotten time. Today our story narrows, focusing on a single, haunting figure. He is unnamed, remembered only as the final scribe of the god Zababa. He lived in the twilight of Kish, long after its grand temple had fallen to ruin and the priests had vanished into history. Alone, he shouldered the sacred duty of remembrance in an era when remembrance itself was forbidden. You won't find his name in the grand chronicles of Babylon. Their histories are silent about him. But a single, broken tablet, unearthed from the dirt near Kish, offers a cryptic clue. The last one wrote with ash. He wrote with the wind. His words were never found. Picture him now, a solitary figure, bent and weary, seated before a cracked clay tablet. His hands tremble as he carves, not with a stylus, but with something more ephemeral. He knows the silence has already consumed his god, yet he continues to write, as if the very act of writing could push back against the encroaching void. He couldn't carve openly. That would have been a death sentence. So, he devised a different method. He would grind sacred offerings into dustbird feathers, unsalted bread, the charred wood from a cold altar, and mix them with water. With this fragile ink, he traced words onto crumbling walls, words that the wind would carry away almost as soon as they were written. No marks survived. This was his unique devotion, to write only what was destined to disappear. A forbidden ritual is tied to his name, the Ash Chronicle. Whispers among the few who remembered said he would gather the dust of shattered tablets, mix it with oil, and smear it across his arms. Then, carrying no water, no food, only the profound silence of his forgotten god, he would walk into the vast, unforgiving desert. As he walked, he would trace words into the sand, watching each one get erased by the wind the very moment it was formed. Some legends claim he reached the gates of the rival city of Akkad and simply vanished. Others say he wanders the desert forever, writing the name of Zababa on the air itself until his last breath gave out. The truth is lost. His records, by their very nature, were never found. This leads us to a profound theological mystery. What does it mean to record something that cannot remain? Was this final scribe desperately preserving his faith against all odds, or was he fulfilling its ultimate erasure? Scholars are fiercely divided. Some see him as a symbol of pure devotion, a faith that persists even beyond hope, refusing to let the silence win completely. Others argue he was an agent of his god's final will, erasing even his own words as the ultimate offering. The archive itself seems to tremble with this paradox. To write is to remember, but to write in ash is to ensure forgetting. Which is true worship, and which is heresy? It's a question without an answer. heretical symbols have appeared. In the sands near Kish, archaeologists discovered fragments of pottery etched with strange, delicate lines. They look like breath-marked short, sequential strokes, as if someone was recording the rhythm of inhalation and exhalation. Could these be the last remnants of his work? Was he transcribing breath itself into a new form of scripture? Or are they just coincidental cracks, mistaken for meaning? The debate rages on, but the strokes are deliberate, carefully aligned. Was silence his final text, and breath his final alphabet? Imagine him one last time. A man walking into the desert, his robes torn, his mouth dry. He presses a finger into the sand, tracing the name Zababa backward, watching the wind erase it before the final letter is even complete. His shadow. You've journeyed with me through forgotten corridors and echoing halls, following whispers of a god who vanished. Now, we stand at the end of it all, in the final chamber of the archive. Here, all whispers cease. The silence is absolute, a tangible presence. Look around. This is all that remains of Zababa, the war god of Kish. Not grand statues or towering monuments, but fragments. Broken tablets lie half buried in dust, the rusted links of chains that once held. What? We can only guess. Look here. Ashes of hymns, their sacred words turned to nothing. In this, a single feather pressed flat against the stone. A fragile, impossible remnant. As we kneel among these ruins, the silence gathers around us, as heavy as the stone blocks that form these walls, and as cold as the shadows they cast. This is the final descent. The name that once thundered through the streets of Kish, a name that made empires tremble, now barely exists. It's a ghost on the tongue, a word made of dust. The chronicles, the very records meant to preserve history, offer no clarity. They close in contradiction. One text, a mere fragment, calls him Zababa, sovereign of silence. Another, more damning, erases him completely. Where his name should be, there is only a blank space, a deliberate void. Was he a god of war, or a fabrication? A patron of kings, or a curse upon them? A silence that simply grew too heavy for worship? But the evidence of Kish tells a different story. The temples that mysteriously collapsed, the lineages of priests that vanished without a trace, the hymns that seemed to erase themselves from memory. These aren't coincidences. They are too numerous, too precise, too silent. Zababa was real. If silence itself can be real, his presence was an absence, his power a void. There was a forbidden ritual, whispered only in fear. It was called the breath of dust, the final act of devotion to a god already gone. To perform it, one had to kneel among his ruins, press the sacred dust to one's mouth, and breathe out his name one last time. It was said that the dust itself carried the syllables, that the air would taste of iron, and that the speaker's voice would dissolve before the name was fully spoken. To speak his name was to unspeak it, and no one who performed this ritual was ever remembered. This brings us to a profound theological mystery. If a god's name turns to dust, does the god truly die? Or does he achieve a different kind of immortality, living forever in the very substance of forgetting? Dust, after all, lingers long after stone crumbles and memory fades. Perhaps Zababa achieved what no other deity could. Not glory, not power, but absolute persistence as absence. Perhaps the only true way to worship him was to vanish with him into silence. And now, here in this final chamber, the dust of the archive is thick on my tongue. I can feel the grit, the history. I'm going to try it. I whispered the name. Zababa. It crumples. The syllables fracture, and the air just swallows them. There was no sound. Not even my own voice. For a moment I wonder if I spoke at all, but then a chilling realization dawns on me. This asterisk is asterisk the ending. This is the truth of the archive. The god isn't forgotten, isn't gone. The god asterisk is asterisk dust. And the dust, it still breathes. Did you feel that? Faint tremor? Like footsteps just beyond hearing? The feather on the stone just rustled, but there is no wind. The archive is empty. There is only silence, dust, and my own trembling breath. I have spoken his name, and it dissolved. Perhaps a part of me dissolved with it. the war god's spear lies broken. His throne is draped in chains that hold nothing. His priests, his hymns, his scribes all lost. Yet his silence remains heavier and more enduring than any monument. His name has turned to dust. Dust, once breathed, does not leave the lungs. It's time to go. As I rise, the weight of this place seems to lift. You walk away from the archive, but the silence does not release you. It clings to your skin like ash, settles into your lungs like sand. You try to recall your own name, and for a moment it trembles, fragile, as though it too could just dissolve. This is the gift of Zababa the war god, who ruled not by conquest, but by erasure. The one who devoured not blood, but memory. The one whose silence was heavier than any sword. He is the god who has been deliberately forgotten. History will not write his name again. Kings will not rebuild his temples. Priests will not chant his hymns. And yet he remains. He is here, in the archive, in the dust, in the silence, and perhaps he remains in you, because gods do not truly die when they are forgotten. They die when the silence around their name no longer trembles. And Zababa trembles still. Try to piece it all together. Those unanswered riddles you found within the dust. The bloodless spear, the vanished priests, the stone that supposedly devoured fire. Were they just myths? Fragments of history? Or were they offerings already consumed by this silent deity? In the end, it doesn't really matter. What matters is this. Every whisper of his name brings him closer. Every moment of silence lets him breathe again. You're carrying a piece of him now, whether you want to or not. You finally reach the edge of the archive's influence and look back. But there is no doorway, no ancient stone, no towering wall. There is only dust, swirling faintly in the air, as if stirred by wings you cannot see. You close your eyes, and in the profound silence that follows, you hear it. A single whisper, so soft it sounds like crumbling stone. Zababa. You don't know if it's your own voice or his. You don't know if it was a sound at all, or just the dust shifting in your lungs. A terrifying thought crosses your mind. Perhaps you are already forgotten. Perhaps you are already his. The path ahead is dark, but the silence follows you like a shadow. And if you listen closely, if you dare to breathe the dust again, you might just find another god waiting in the quiet, because the archive is never finished. There are always more forgotten names, always more dust, and always more silence. The ritual ends here, but in truth, it never really ends, because there are more gods. There are always more gods. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the forgotten. If you want to uncover more lost stories and forgotten deities, make sure to subscribe and ring that bell. Till next time, listen to the silence.